Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Regeneration Podcast. I'm Michael Martin here with my co-host, Mike Stoddard. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
It's been a hectic morning.
Okay.
I just got in the house from helping my daughter milk because my wife and the other kids went to their homeschool thing. And it's kind of a chaotic morning, but I'm back in the saddle.
Milking cows or goats?
Cows.
Okay.
Well, just one cow. But, and then, yeah, so that kind of stuff. And here we're going to actually have a wonderful conversation with Merri Walters, who is I don't know what your title is, but she runs and makes stuff for the Great Lakes Sacred Essence in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I have a story that's connected to that. So Merri doesn't know
Tell the story. Yeah.
I don't think Merri knows this. So my son Dylan is now 30. And when he was born, he was my wife's first child. And so we probably started giving him food too early, and all of a sudden he exploded with allergy. He had eczema super bad, and his fingernails almost looked like feathers. They were like feathered, if you can imagine. I've never seen it in another child. Huh. And we, took him to a holistic pediatrician. Nothing helped. But then one of our former guests, Mary Jo Oresti, said, "You got to take him." And she's actually Dylan's godmother. She said, "You need to take him to Merri Walters." So Bonnie took him to Merri Walters almost 30 years ago. Oh. And it helped. It worked. Oh. Well, I can't remember. I don't know what you gave him, but it worked. And then, so the story gets even better. So a couple days ago, when we confirmed that we would be talking to Merri this morning, I was here in my office. I go into the kitchen, and Bonnie, my wife, was talking to one of our herd share customers or members. And so she was here picking up some raw milk, and they were talking about healing and whatever. And I just told Bonnie, I said, "Hey, we're going to talk to Merri Walters on Friday." And she said, "That's great." And the person she was talking to, "Is that the woman in Ann Arbor? I took my son to see him." Wow. So yeah. And so that's why we're here today, to talk about Merri's fascinating work. And I've been impressed for a long time. And I've never met Merri in person, but I'm really glad to make this acquaintance today.
Yeah, and I'm glad.
Welcome, Merri.
Yeah, and also let's mention that though she's calling in this morning, that they get to see the spelling of her first name, which people might not have known had we not seen it on her screen. Merri. How'd you get that first name, Merri?
It's an old name. My background is my mother was her parents were Samis from Northern Europe, the reindeer herder type. Wow. And there was one of their children, one of my grandmother's sisters was named Merri, Meri. And I think because I was born just before Christmas, my dad added another R into it. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
So if you could, Merri, why don't you tell us how you got started in, the healing work that you do?
Okay.
You've been doing it for a long time.
Right. Probably over 40 years now. Very clearly, I was born and always kind of struggling with my health. From the time I was a little girl, I had struggles. I had chronic strep throat. I had I was on rounds of antibiotics again and again, which of course we all know is not a good idea. Pretty much strips your immune system. Yeah. And I had just so many things. I don't even want to chronicle all of those things I had as a child and young adult. In my 20s, though, I was doing social work. I had all these different counseling jobs and social work, and I worked with so many different people, and which was great for life experience, but it kept coming back to my body. My body was not holding up. And I think that you'll find a lot of healers have this story, where they're really struggling. So I went to all the Western medical people, and they did what they did. And they tried to do crazy things, put me on crazy drugs and things, but they never worked. And so I've always had a really deep and rich prayer life. And I just got told way back then, just, you need to go in a different direction, like start trusting nature, start looking in other ways. And so I'm really very self-taught. It doesn't mean I haven't studied with people along the way or been very interested in other, ways of practicing. I've definitely learned things, and a lot of that is my curiosity. I'm always interested in, like, oh, what's going on there? And, like, what can I learn from that, or what can I? And so what I really learned, though, was that my super sensitivity, and I mean like sensitive, emotional, physically, I could sit next to somebody and take on their illness. I mean, I was pulling it in. I was feeling everything. And I learned that that is actually a gift, but you have to learn how to control it. You have to learn how to understand the information that you are receiving and then use it as a tool, but as a way to see the world and to understand, like, okay, this is good for me, that's not good, this is, and I've learned to project that sensitivity and work with other people, actually feel what's in their body, and then I can locate that. I've got this office I'm sitting in with like thousands of homeopathic and herbal and, flower essence remedies and other essential oils, other things that I work with that may be helpful, but also a lot of other information too, structural guidance. So that's kind of been my path, and it's a learning path, continuing to learn on and continue to be very spiritually connected, where I recognize being guided all the time,
It's fascinating, Merri, that you mentioned, just right off the bat for our listeners too, that you invoked God in a number of ways and a number of times, and God's gifts in creation. But if Mike and I both kind of come from a Catholic background, the notion again that like, that we've been so severed, the Catholic faith from, for a while you had Catholic hospitals, then they were Catholic in name only. Now they're all closed, at least in Rochester. But, you give me hope that there's a different way that we can just become people, or any type of Christian or any person of faith can become people who aren't just constrained to this thing we call like, religious stuff or church building.
And also estranged from the cosmos, which I think that what's I think so important. It's what I've been writing books about this for a long time, but and Merri's work is actually so I might be the theoretical practice. I'm a farmer, the farmer's not so a theoretical, but Merri's actually doing practical application of all the things I've been talking about theology. So Merri, I wonder if you could tell us, what happens? So say when my wife brought Dylan to, or someone comes to see you, what is your process, or what do you do?
Well, I had to break things down because there's so many things going on in the human system. So I have learned like an acupuncture system of identifying spots on the body, basically where you can get different information, like, okay, I can listen to the liver here, I can spleen here, I can listen to the immune system or the lymphatic system. And so I will touch my client in these areas. I do remote sessions now too. And so I just touch myself and figure it out, like what is going on there. And then I can listen to those areas of the body and see, what do I see? And then, and I think that this is where, you get this leap of faith that, I've always, like I said, been very spiritually oriented. And I love these quotes in the Bible where it says something like, you're going to be able to do even more than this. You can move mountains. You can, all these great quotes. But nobody really practices that. Right. And so I was just like, okay, the leap of faith. This way I can feel the energy here, and then I can walk across the room or, anywhere really. And I can put my hand on something and know and go, oh, that's a match, and what you feel or what I feel is it's kind of like a magnetic connection. Like the substance and the body go whoop and go right together. And then, like, okay, this is really, helpful to, that particular part of the body. But then there's more process there because I usually will have somebody do more than one thing because I'm going to be working with the physical body. The spiritual body. I'll be working with the intellectual body. I'll be working with different parts of the body to make sure that all works together. So as I gather things together, I'll be rechecking those and rechecking the body and saying, okay, is this a good mix? And it's why I've gone into so many different things. I know that the original homeopathics wouldn't let you take any herbs along with that homeopathic. Well, why
Right.
wouldn't you take an herb along with it? I can't ever figure that out.
That is so
But
funny.
they were trying to develop a science. I do understand where they wanted to know that this really worked, and and it wasn't the herb that also went along with it. But I don't need to do that, because I'm not developing a science. I'm just trying to help that person, feel better. So I find you have the homeopathics, which work very much in what I call the intelligence of the body.
Yeah.
So your body's always trying to heal. It's not that your body ever wants to be in distress. It's trying to heal, but sometimes it's missing the information it needs to get there. And so the homeopathic's going to give you that information if it's the right one. If it's the wrong one, it won't do a thing. And then the herbs are going to give you the substance your body needs, the trace minerals, the nutrients, whatever it is. So you get that in there, and then you go to flower essences, and the flower essence will give you the spiritual information, the emotional healing, because we only get ill when there's some sort of break in that spiritual emotional field. You don't just get, if somebody is I've never been sick a day in my life, and you look at their persona and that they just move through the world with a strength, and you go, okay, well, nothing can get into that. But then their wife dies, or they get fired from work, they get some trauma, and then suddenly they get sick.
Yep.
So all of these things are important, but I'm saying to that healing process. So that's why I've gone in all these different things. My goal really is to support the person in front of me.
There's a question, like a statement in the question, and maybe a comment too. So the statement is, when you mentioned the moving mountain, I think it's so refreshing that you're contextualizing this kind of in that original, you're turned on to that. So many young people, they can't believe the lilies of the field and the birds of the air stories are real. And I know people in the recovery community who say the 12 steps themselves were fine, but in the recovery community, it was the 12 promises that inspired them to move forward. And I think getting your energy is a great way to relate to people now from those promises. We're so cynical now. Can something like that be true? And also with, your felt sense of connections, and this will bring in Michael's work too, but your felt sense of connections between certain herbs and certain organs of the body, and it could be like milk thistle in the liver, that Michael's work he's explored, and I do too on my own. We're living in a world of fallen perception. Now we could say it just happened, but also, you can explain it almost mechanistically. If you just said, when we look at the world now, we always have the scientific motive. To dissect is to kill is to understand, and so forth. And the other one would
to murder is to dissect is to murder.
To murder, right. And the other one would be the profit motive. Can I even look at a tree or a person without reducing them to their component parts? Or the profit motive. When Jesus says, if you look at a girl or a woman with the wrong way, it's better to tear out your eye, right? So we've lost a perceptual ability, and you're saying you were gifted maybe through suffering early. But can you comment on that a little bit? And finally, on one of your videos, I just want to make sure you make it clear that to people who might be foreign from this, you have a video on flower essences, and just the fact that, yes, we turn to flowers when people are sick. We turn to flowers like Tussie Mussy to explain so many different things that can open a door that we already are turning to flowers for these essences in one way. And you make that so clear, and I think it's a great bridge into your work. But go ahead on any of those.
Okay. Yeah, I think that, I make essences just because I've also, I have to be clear about making the essences. I didn't ever decide I was going to go do this. I was really spiritually told over and over again, you need to do this. And I have 8 children. I was at that time, 20 years ago, I was really busy with a busy practice. Michael, I know you have a lot of children. You have some sort of an idea of how much household, responsibility and tasks and things like that are going on all the time. And the individual, it's a lot. And, I say I was over and over again asked you now this voice, because I do hear voices. Now we need you to make essences of the flowers. And I knew that, other people make flower essences. I have over 2,000 flower essences in my offices made by other people, and I know the power of them. And I was not feeling like I needed to do that also. But what happened to me during that process was I made a couple. And I thought, well, that's good. We had been on a vacation up on Lake Superior, and we came back, and I said, okay, I've done the job. And I was having a prayer with my husband in our backyard, and I get this message again. Now we need you to make essences of the flowers. And I looked up, and we had a cherry tree in our backyard that we had planted years ago. It had the placentas of two of our children under. And I didn't realize when I planted a cherry tree there, that cherry tree is only about 23 years or so. And that cherry tree had died years ago. And when I looked up, the cherry tree in September, the dead cherry tree in September was in full blossom. It had blossomed all over it, and I was reduced to complete weeping.
Wow.
I couldn't believe that this had, that it took that much, one, to get me to do something I was supposed to do, that I had to have that kind of a spiritual intervention. But of course, I did start at that moment to be committed to that path and realize that that was really to do. What happened then was that cherry tree continued to put up blossom until December. In snow, it made Christmas cherries.
Wow.
And
you're living in Michigan. This is not Georgia, folks.
No, this is Michigan. Yeah. And it was a dead tree. Everything about this, like you walk past that tree and you like sort of knocked on a branch and it would pretty much almost rip off the tree. There was really not any, any life in the way we know it in that tree. Well, that tree, then, it made these Christmas cherries, and then it went looking dead again. It was dead all the next summer. For 4 years in a row, it bloomed in September. You got to remember, cherry trees don't bloom in September, they bloom in April. And did the same process. And that winter, I was told to make one more essence of those blossoms. And then I knew something was going to happen. And then in January, we had an ice storm, and the tree just, every branch just fell on the ground. And actually see how dead it was. And there wasn't some little green thing coming up. And it was a very dead tree. So that was really the beginning of that. We had a whole lot of experiences, miracle experiences, several things where things would just bloom in the middle of winter. I had a primrose blooming December, but like this winter, it's not very cold. It was like, I believe about 17 degrees. And I walked out. Actually, a client told me, she said, Merri, flowers grow blooming out there. And and it was so cold out that when flower essences are really just the energy for thousands, like you do with an essential oil you need to collect. With a flower essence, the process is very easy. It's a very spiritual process. You get asked to make the essence, or that's how I do it. I get asked, I go out there with a crystal bowl. I put the flowers in spring water in the essence, or if we're in nature somewhere else, we collect water from that area and from a spring or a stream or something. And then it just sits out there with sun infusing, or at least the nature elements infusing, don't have sun. And then you actually leave the flower, and all you're collecting is that water, which we then potentize with to make the S. But anyway, when we were making this one of this flower in in December, I put out the crystal bowl with the water and the flowers in the water, and the water immediately froze on the top. So that's how cold it was.
I
And yet
remember that winter.
flower, right around the flower, it did not freeze, as though the flower was putting out. So, miracles, lots and lots of miracles have happened, these years and this and before in my life too. And I think as human beings, one of the most important is not how much we know, it's how much we believe. We are so limiting ourselves by just believing these tiny little bits of existence. There's so much else going on. And when we start to recognize that, all of the intelligence around us, the God force in everything, and that's actually transmitting to us and helping us, and, bringing us this light and energy. Goodness sakes, why do we just live, in this tiny bit of existence? We've been given so.
Well, your story about the cherry tree reminds me as the Glastonbury thorn. You know what the Glastonbury thorn?
Yes.
Which blooms at Easter or at Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And also remember there's a wonderful Christmas carol, the Cherry Tree Carol. You know that one?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know it either.
Well, no, that's a famous one. It's Joseph and Mary on the way to Egypt, and Mary asks for some cherries. It's the dead of winter, right? They see a cherry tree or in fruit. So that's really wonderful. Now this is totally well, maybe not totally. Now, so what I remember Bonnie telling me about when she came to see you with Dylan those years ago is how many kids you had in the house, which made her, I think you inspired her, because now we have 9, right? But and what's the age range of your children?
Okay, my youngest will be turning 24 this year. And they go up to 41. There's 17 years spread between the kids.
Nice.
So yeah. Kids are so great, and I've always worked. When they were little, I worked with them in the office. I never got like a babysitter to be watching them. They just came in and out. I always felt they were part of the healing. It was, they really are.
Beautiful statement. They are part of the healing.
Absolutely.
And again, through their eyes, it could probably keep you focused on what you do.
Yeah.
You use the word, Merri, and again, some of your videos, and I think I know what you mean by it, but you'll tell people your website, and there's videos that describe kind of a lot of your work, and I would even some videos would describe kind of your philosophy, but you use the word sensitives a lot. The sensitive. Can you kind of describe for our listeners, what you mean by that and why it takes such kind of a prominent role in your worldview?
Yes. So sensitives is actually a word my husband always used for me. He says, "Oh, well, that's because you're a sensitive," like when I would explain something or why I was perceiving something in a certain way. So it comes from that, although I see it being used a lot these days. There's books on it and all that. And I haven't read those books, so I don't know if they mean the same thing I mean. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who are sensitives, and at different levels, and a lot of children certainly being born, and the younger generations. It simply means that you feel and you sense that is a predominant part of your experience here, is this sensing. And it's very negated in our culture. We want our kids all to be scientists and basically go through the system which teaches you how to go work in a corporation, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, and what the heck, that just, it seems like you're missing the point.
Stronger
of
language there, Merri. Yeah,
these kids are born and their parents are thinking about what college they'll go to, and I'm like, no, that's not the point of being a human being. We have to get back to that. But being a sensitive is just that, that you're experiencing things, through your senses. You're experiencing things on a deeper level. You're, and that's important to you. Now, so many sensitives, it's just being turned off because it's seen as a problem.
Right.
It is looked at as a medical. It's and we need to stop that and recognize it all in primitive. I don't want to call it primitive, but in in, tribal culture, sensitives were highly valued. They were the ones who could tell you that, this is the herb, this is the medicine we need, this is the weather that's coming, along, so we need to prepare for that. They weren't the warrior. There are, some people are born and they are warriors, and I'm not saying they should make war. I'm saying that they, have a different strength in the world, and that's okay. Not everybody is a sensitive. We wouldn't have strong culture if, God had created everybody the same, or to have the same experience. We really need these other ways of our brains functioning and our bodies. But I think that as far as sensitives in this time period, we need to acknowledge it. We need to go, oh, this is a gift. This is
like the cornerstone that's been rejected,
Yeah. So, Merri, let me ask you about this topic, because I have personal investment. Do you notice that the being a sensitive kind of runs in family lines at all?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it ran in my family line.
Yeah. Because it did mine too. So my father, for instance, he often saw dead people. They would come to visit him, and he would tell me about it. And then it passed. I think I must be the one it passed to in my family, because in my among my siblings. And my wife always tells when my wife was listening to something about MK Ultra experimenting with children doing remote viewing, and one of the kids says, "What are they doing?" He goes, "This is what would have happened to your dad if MK Ultra knew he existed when he was a kid." Well, I think it's true, because I've had similar experiences. And then my daughter May, when she was little, she saw fairies in our garden. While Bonnie was raking, and she said, "Stop!" And Bonnie said, "What's the matter?" Those people down there, don't touch them. So and she's definitely of my children for sure. Her.
Yeah, no, my kids used to tell me things like that when they were small too, and I used to see fairies, and I do still sometimes see them. I think that is, there's always like less of a chance is out there, and I think that's just gets back to this. Where's your beliefs? Because the belief system allows for a whole range of things to start opening up if you don't have it closed down. I know that my oldest brother was he died when he was 45. He had juvenile diabetes at the time. He was blind the last of his life, and I remember visiting him. We're talking ultra hippie. He lived in a abandoned miners cabin in the mountains of Colorado.
That's great.
And we were we were talking about comets, and I don't know if Halley's comet was coming or going, or we were just talking about it. And he says, "Oh yeah, but that's nothing, compared to," and now I'm talking about 1973. He says, "That's nothing compared to Hale-Bopp." And, and then he said after that, because he was a real jokester, he says, "Yeah, but wait till you see Hale-Bopp Bop," and if he hadn't said that, because that was, and then he laughed. And if he hadn't said that, I would have never remembered that name, Hale-Bopp. So when my kids come home from school and they tell me about this comet that is coming, that, is this just was discovered, I go, "Oh no. Oh,
Isn't that funny?
Because my brother told me about this, all this time ago." But, John had all these very psychic experiences he was having when he was here. Lots of stories there. But we need to listen, and recognize that people are talking the truth. And I think a very common experience in my office, when someone brings in, say, their husband or their teenager, somebody who just thinks this is a bunch of phooey, they're not gonna be in it, and they sit there with their arms crossed and they're looking at me, and they're looking around my office. I got lots of crystals and lots of things in my office, to make me.
I'd be relaxed in your office. And, I'm there with my arms folded when I go to my actual position. I'd be as open as anything at your office. Go ahead.
Yeah. And anyway, they're just being very skeptical, and I love it, because we're just talking and I'm just doing my thing. And at some point they recognize this is, that I hit on something, that they know, oh my God, no one else could have known that. No one else could have, this is actually a real experience. And by the end of the session, the first session is 2 hours, so we get a lot of time. By the end of the session, I can hardly get them to leave because they just spill out like just all these experiences that they have had, but they had no one else to tell it to, because in this world, these things are negated. People laugh at you. People, I learned as a very young child to just shut up.
Yep.
You don't talk about this stuff, because your friends and other people just don't get it now. But fortunately, I didn't shut it off.
There's a theme, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but I was talking with somebody this morning and it came to my mind and I think it's relevant, but there's a story told of B.F. Skinner that his students, he was speaking on a stage and they would pretend to be falling asleep when he was speaking from the middle of the stage. But when he wandered over to a corner, they'd kind of look alert. By the end of the lecture, or maybe the end of the semester, they always had him speaking from a tiny corner of the stage. And that's a good visual for me in what you're saying about, what we're calling the narrowing of experience, right? That it feeds, our vision gets constricted, so we see less. It gets more suggested to us that it's all just material. And then, but we've just had this wild kind of, they say, you smile when you're happy, and when you smile, it makes you feel happy. And the same type of back and forth relationship has led to this wild constriction of vision, the narrowing of vision.
Yeah. And I think that's why our bodies are reacting by being in more pain.
That's a beautiful way to say it. Yeah, so important.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is I think people try to people act like they're scientific materialists. They've been trained to think like they're scientific materialists, but we aren't. I mean, we are organically. And I remember a friend of mine, you might even know him, Doug Gabriel. He told me, this is maybe 20 years ago. It has to be 25, maybe 28 years ago. He told, because he was dealing with a health issue himself at the time, and he had gone around to, there was a miraculous icon in St. Clair's Shores of Saint Frenarius. And what happened on the saint's feast day, so it was an icon of this soldier saint holding a candle, and on his feast day, the glass around the candle flame formed a kind of halo and just kind of burned into the glass. And then on, I think it was Palm Sunday, his halo was burned into somehow or etched in. And my friend Doug said, go see that thing, go check it out. So I went to check it out, Bonnie and I, and it was in this little tiny, basically garage Orthodox church in St. Clair's Shores, or Fraser, I think it was. And so I went to see it, and the priest was talking to us, and he said, well, you might want to come up here. You look like you're Catholic. We have a reliquary over here. And I went to the reliquary, which was right in front of the icon screen. And in there, one of the relics they had was a piece of cloth from the Virgin Mary, from one of her cloaks. And I remember thinking, I said, wow. And I told Bonnie, I said, it's like, can you feel this? She couldn't feel it. It's like there's electricity or something going from this relic to the icon stand.
Yeah.
And Bonnie didn't feel it, but I certainly did. It was undeniable. But the next time I saw Doug, I said, hey, Doug, I went to see that icon. He said, it's the relic of Mary. Didn't even, he went right there. And I was like, wow, that's confirmation.
Yeah.
And so, and I think, as you say, Mary, more people are sensitive to we let on, and it's crushed. The sensitivity by our culture and our education in particular.
Yeah, it is.
Our friend Guido Pepperata, he looks at the whole, what he calls the techno structure. It's simply even, and it's so evil, but looks at, almost racially, that the people who are kind of calling the shots, who oppress this stuff, look at whole groups of people by whether they, as groups of people, can fit into this world you describe of working, on computers and cubicles and as engineers. And if they're not, they're relegated to, second, third, or fourth class status. But again, the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm.
Yeah, I think that
example.
I've encouraged all my kids, like don't go into corporate work. Come on, let's, do what you're here to do. Be who who you are, and you'll be okay. But you can't buy into those structures. And of course, not all of them have. Some of them are in those structures, but that's.
I was just going to mention the show Family Ties, that every family like yours, my own included, has somebody who wants to just go into that world, and they do quite well. But I'm sure it's the case, Merri, where they haven't forgotten their roots.
No, they've not. They've not. No. My kids are awesome. There's not an awesome. It isn't just sensitive. It's just that it's a hard place to be. I mean, because you get, you become a young adult, you have to make money. There isn't any other way to pursue your life. You're going to have to support yourself and make money. And that's a hard thing, because what are your options? Hopefully you end up doing something you love, and hopefully, you can use your gifts. But there is that component, where we all have to we have to engage in that and at some level.
Yeah. Unfortunately, but it's interesting. You're bringing back memories. So back in the 80s, it had to be mid 80s, maybe 87, 88. I started to think, wow. And I was working at a bookstore at the time, but I started to think, what I'd really like to do? I'd really like to be an herb gatherer. And I was living in the city. I was in Oak Park. I was in Ferndale at the time. So I would love that job. But I think what it was, and the other thing for my whole life was fascinating with growing things. So I think that was one of the impulses pushing me in the direction of being a biodynamic farmer, and which is what I am now. But I think this is important. What you're talking about is these kinds of intuitions or even instincts that we have as young people and we see in our children, and that we live in a culture that's basically hostile to that, So how do you? And it's an important point you make. You still have to make a living somehow. So how does that happen? And how do you? And I think this is the lesson, right? Is how do you learn to trust? How do you learn to trust?
Yeah.
Say more about that question, Michael and Merri.
I'm sorry?
That how do you learn to trust? I want you to unpack that a little bit, because yeah.
Well, for me, I just feel like I've never had any, I don't know, I don't have an ability to not trust, if I could say it that way. Yeah. I've always felt that, I've always been just led by that trust. I mean, I could go back to being a teenager. I could go back to being a young person, I guess. So the way my husband and I travel is the way I started to travel when I was 17. I went on a big pilgrimage out west with two of my girlfriends when I was 17. And what we did every morning, we'd get out the map and we would ask, where are we going? And what road are we taking? And we still we traveled that way with all 8 kids. We often would get in the big van and everybody's packed up and we didn't know if we were going north or south, Our kids were kind of like, well, Mom, we kind of hate this because we can't ever tell our friends where we're going. And then we end up going all these cool places.
We kind of hate it.
Yeah, there was social media back then when the kids were growing up. So they couldn't just tweet everybody where they were or what they were doing. But yeah, and that kind of moved into making these essences. We were already set because, we would do the same thing. And so it's not just about making that essence of, say, the daisy or something. It's about making the daisy that's growing in the place you're supposed to make that essence at the right astronomical timing, and that, there's so many components there, that are going on to create that synergy and get the correct intelligence. And then of course, we're in the desert of New Mexico or Utah or something, and we're told you're making an essence tomorrow morning. Okay. And so we kind of know some things. We know we have to get up before sunrise. We have to pack our flower essence pack, but then we get out and we have no idea where we're going, so we have to get led down the right paths to find whatever it is we're making that essence of. And then I think the next process in that is sitting there for the couple of hours that you're waiting that essence to be made, and writing the story that is. And that's what I hear. So if you get onto my website and you read about a plant, you find like, where did she get this information? I get it right from the plant. I'm not making that.
That's great.
I'm not researching it.
Yeah,
I'm not, that's been, the reason we have like 300 essences is just because that comes right there, right then. And then we take it out into the world and see if it works, like is involved, but they're always, and I think that the question was trust. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot.
In that whole process, there's a lot of trust.
Yeah, there's a lot of trust, and there's a lot of trust. And that's the way I live my life, is that trust. And if I don't trust, I have no idea what would happen. I think probably not much, because it'd be a different life. And I think that that's when I say we have to believe, that's just the biggest factor for human beings, is this factor of belief. And if we don't have that belief, that trust, we're going to end up doing things that we regulate to being safe. And that makes our life very slow. And that's why we don't meet the love of our life or find what we really want. Maybe we will eventually, but, really, there's so much of that where we're just jumping off a cliff. Don't know what's going to happen. You gotta have that faith and trust.
It's an important distinction. I mean, the opposite of trust is fear.
Yeah.
And
love, right? And love. St. Paul says love casts out fear. But not trusting is a form of fear. And the opposite is love.
Right.
And I think we see, we live this, and this is, how, I teach this course on, it's supposed to be on writing theory, but I just write about whatever I want to do it. And one of the things we talk about is the power of propaganda, and propaganda runs on this carrot and the stick, and the stick is fear, and the carrot is reward or a perceived reward for what you think you're doing. But neither one of those things have anything to do with trust or belief, right? So you become kind of enmeshed in this trap, the matrix or whatever you want to call it. You're just not in the real world anymore. And this is what I've been writing about for years, is how do we, and I don't have to tell Merri this, but the question for, I think, a lot of people is, how do we re-engage in the real, right?
Yeah.
How do we, and you mentioned, right? So like the one, picking the flowers at the proper astronomical moment.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, right. Well, so the thing is I'm not an astrologist. I know a little bit, but I am not guiding that, but I know it's happening. I know that the reason we couldn't do this essence, somewhere else in my backyard, or, because the same flower essentially will grow in many places frequently. Sometimes we're doing something quite unique. But I know that those things are at play, and those things are influences, this, where the moon is, what time of day it is, so many things are at play. And even my emotions, my husband's, because we make them together, all of that. We start with prayers. We ask, to be cleared of all the crap we might be, feeling, or, at the time. We ask to be ready. We ask the plant, are you ready? Is this the right time? Is this the right place? Even if we've been guided there and we've been told to do all these things, we always ask before we do it. We ask the permission, because I think those are important things. We're forgetting that we have to ask permission. We just, I think that's what, your prayer before you eat, part of that is just permission. Do I have permission to eat this? Do the carrots that I'm eating, are they okay with this? Is this a good thing? Is this good for my body? Is it, the blessing is one thing, but the permission is another thing. We need to remember that we need to go to both of those places and just be more present with it all. I believe that if humankind were taught more of this, and our religion has failed us in many ways, in its more structural sense of teaching things. I think it alludes to it, but it doesn't really teach us practice how we need to be in the world. And that's sad, and I think it's why so many people, it's the same with the medical institutions that call themselves healing institutions and all of that. They're failing us. They really have become more institutions and not, not what they need to be. Not they're not really healing us, and they're not really even putting us on that path. And with our, with our connection to spirit and that sacred part of ourselves, that's just so. I want to say it's worse than sad. It's almost devastating.
It's tragic. Is what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
It's tragic that lost thing.
So true.
Mm-hmm. And that's and that big part of what Mike and I are doing with this podcast is trying to help people reconnect with that. And my work is all about, I've written all these books. They're all about that. It's like I haven't written 9 books. I've written 1 book 9 times, right?
Right.
Because and that's the only message when people say, "What's sociology about?" I said, "Well, basically being in harmony with the spiritual world and the natural world." No, really, what's it up? No, that's it. That's the whole thing.
It must be more because you wrote 9 books.
No, it's not more complicated.
No.
And you would know this, Michael, that when you write, you're not writing it. I know when I write, I'm not writing it. It's coming through you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that anybody who's writing needs to understand that, because people say, well, I sit down to write, but I don't know what I'm doing. I say, well, just listen.
Right.
And trust what is coming through you, because it will be the right thing, and it'll surprise you as
Mm-hmm.
much. I mean, when I write it, like, whoa, I didn't know I was
Right.
And I think we've been taught to write by this method of just like all this research and all these things coming together, and you gotta check all your facts and stuff. Well, why would you do that? You're just taking other people's stuff that they
Mm-hmm.
wrote and regurgitating it, with maybe a couple of ideas of your own. And that's ridiculous. I have like 25, 50 herb books that all say the same thing.
Yeah, they do.
And I think,
Well, here's I think you
why
point
is
to
anybody afraid to talk about their own personal
Right.
experience?
that's really a great thing to mention, because and I do know, so there are 3 realms in which
Mhm.
I enter into that space you're describing, and one of it is when I'm writing.
Mhm.
But nobody ever watches me write, right? The other
Mhm.
2 are when I play the guitar,
Mhm.
or when I'm pruning apple tree.
There you go.
And I didn't notice it, but this happened from my wife. This is a long time ago, but when I was a Waldorf teacher, I was in the teacher's lounge, or in my class. I was in my classroom, and the kids were out on the playground. So I was in my classroom. I'm playing my guitar, and I didn't know, but my friend was watching me, and I looked up, and she said, "Michael, you don't look like the same person when you're doing that,"
Mhm.
because I was just improvising, I was just letting
Right.
them come out. And the same thing happened when I was at my old house in Oak Park, and I was pruning an apple tree, and Bonnie was watching. She said, "This is so weird." I said, "What? Because you don't look like the same person when you're doing that." Because when you enter and when you enter into the contemplative space, which is what I think you're describing, when you and your husband talk to the plants, you're entering into that contemplative space, where you're letting you're letting it speak to you, right?
Right.
And that's when we talked about Goethe on the show before. That's what his method of science, I'm going to call it that, was listening to the phenomenon and letting them.
100%.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Truly.
So that might be a good place to stop. And so Merri, tell our audience where they can find you.
Okay. Well, you can just look up my name online, or you can look up the website sacredessences.com or Great Lakes sacredessences.com. They'll all bring you to my website. You can email me at sacredessences@gmail.com or Merri@sacredessences.com. So any of those things work.
That's
Or
wonderful.
you speak with authority, and again, there's such an ease. You have a message to share, and the medium is the message when it comes from you. You're so comfortable with this stuff. It doesn't sound like you're trying to. It's the opposite of propaganda, and it's the opposite of defensive. It's that nice middle space, and it's so refreshing to hear you talk.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this interview. This is I love talking about these things. I love, being with other people who are going down this journey too.
Yeah.
So thank you. I feel honored.
Yeah, and encourage everybody to try, today, if you're listening, try something in this musical register of trust, a gut instinct, a vision quest. Do something every day, every week, every month. It just gets this kind of feeling going, and and because without it, life is just a dead end.
And Merri, if you're ever directed in the direction of Grass Lake, Michigan to find anything, you're always welcome at my farm.
Yeah, you can peruse.
Thank you so much. That'll be wonderful. Yeah.
And thanks everybody for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you again next week.